Hello. This is the first part of this year's Shabbat HaGadol drashah. It's the bit that I normally give in the morning and it's relatively short. The longer part, which is the main drashah itself, will be recorded and distributed separately. Despite the difficulties that we're not together, everyone is doing their very best to prepare for Pesach, and in the shiur that I gave last week we discussed leniencies, and I'm very happy to continue to discuss individual circumstances by phone, text or email as usual. My responsibility in the first part of this drashah is to give a brief digest of Halachot of Pesach. Now, there's no substitute for proper learning and asking questions, and as I've mentioned, I make myself available right up to Pesach. But if you do have questions that you know are there, either regular questions or questions because of unusual circumstances this year, please do ask them with plenty of time in advance. We begin. There are three prohibitions of chometz associated with Pesach. One is eating chometz, the second is owning chometz, and the third is deriving benefit from chometz. And that means one must get rid of any chometz in the areas one eats, either dispose of or sell any chometz to a non-Jew, and avoid trading or any other activities with chometz during the Pesach. And although during the year we have all kinds of food prohibitions, mixtures of milk and meat particularly, which are forbidden, chometz is a much more severe prohibition, and that means we go out of our way to really ensure that the foods we eat, the utensils on which we prepare those foods, are absolutely chometz free for the duration of Pesach. Now, the purpose of Pesach cleaning is to remove chometz. It is not to spring clean, important as that is, and lots of us are doing it this time of the year because we're at home unexpectedly. There's no chometz in your garden, there's no chometz in your light fittings, and you should only inspect your home and clear out for chometz before Pesach in areas where chometz could credibly have been taken. We have a principle in our house which is almost always adhered to. There's no food upstairs, certainly no chometz type foods. We do no Pesach preparation at all in the upstairs of the house, and you should do likewise. Chometz, unless you have children who throw food around, I would say window ledge height or even slightly lower, only check for chometz beneath that area, because above that it's very unlikely food would ever get there. If you have lots of books, you don't have to search through them. You can simply make sure you don't bring them to the table or use them during food if you think they've been in contact with chometz during the year. Try to make it as easy as possible. The primary principle, as we said, is that if chometz is not normally taken there, then you do not have to prepare that area for Pesach at all. For most people, this means that the kitchen area and areas where one eats food, dining rooms, morning rooms, other areas, living rooms where one takes food, do require preparation for Pesach. That goes for your car as well, because I'm assuming that you carry shopping and sometimes eat in the car, but other areas do not. Now, while this year is very different from others, that the principle remains that if at all possible we try to get supervised foods for Pesach. There are excellent lists available online from the London Basin and other authorities, and in extremis for this year, as you would have seen, for those who are simply unable to obtain Pesach products, and for those who are isolated or unable to get out at all due to circumstance, the London Basin have published a very helpful list of leniencies to be used in extremis. Please use it as intended, but do use it if it's necessary and it fits your set of circumstances. Despite at the beginning of the period a sense there was insufficient food, I'm informed reliably that there is sufficient food in the Pesach shops, but do be very cautious when shopping, if at all possible, to observe the appropriate social distancing. Spend as little time as possible in the shops. Many of them are only allowing a small number of people in at once, which means the process takes longer, but it's safer for all of us. Now, when it comes to preparing the kitchen this year, we are not running a pre-Pesach koshering session at the shul. It's simply not possible given the current restrictions, and I've given instructions already how to do this. Metal items that are used with boiling water, that means saucepans, and it applies also to cutlery and many other items, in contrast to baking pans and frying pans, which can't be done kosher by this method, should be cleaned, left for 24 hours, and then boiled. If you need advice exactly how to do that, then please ask for advice. I'm not going to go into a lot of detail about how to kasher your oven or your stove. They do differ. There are relatively straightforward instructions available online. Follow what you've done in previous years. If these processes take more than 20 or 30 minutes, you're doing it unnecessarily stringently. Foodstuffs that are old, that have been sprayed with abrasive sprays, are not halachically food, and although you do need to kasher an oven well, clean it well, spray it out, and cover those parts, if you can, that can be covered safely, you do not have to scrub every inch of black gums, which isn't food by any definition. It's also true that it's possible to kasher sinks, worktops, microwaves, and also stoves of all sorts, sinks and so on. They do differ from one from another, and if you can't remember from previous years, or you hear the Pesach for the first time and are not sure, you haven't found clear instructions online, do send me a message and I'll give you specific instructions. None of these things are too onerous. As I mentioned, it's forbidden to own chametz during Pesach, and that means in the ideal world, and certainly how the Torah originally intended it, we would get rid of chametz products, use them up, or give them away or dispose of them before Pesach. It's been a very long-standing practice, particularly for those who tend to have quantities of food, especially those things like spirits which are expensive in stock, to make a sale to a non-Jew. That is done centrally. It's a complex matter, and it's a sale that must be valid both in Jewish and in English law. This year particularly, even those people who are often stringent to get rid of chametz products, given potential food shortages and common sense, do not do that. It's permitted to keep bread, pasta, any products, providing you make a valid sale. If you've not sent your sale a chametz form, please do so. But due to the circumstance, I can only receive them directly to me. That means either drop them through my door if that's safe, but better still, send them to me electronically, either by WhatsApp or by email, and I would arrange for them to be included in the sale. There's a mitzvah of tashbisu, which is eliminating chametz and chametz type products from one's home by and during Erev Pesach. And we perform that in a very specific way, assuming that by Erev Pesach, that means Tuesday evening, the 7th, when Erev Pesach begins, the 14th of Nisan, the one's home is mostly ready for Pesach. One then proceeds at nightfall, which is around 8:20, to Bedikas Chometz, the search for Chometz. This is an opportunity to search formally in all those areas where food is normally taken. It does not include garages, gardens, light fittings, or the upstairs of your house if you do not take food there during the year. To do a formal search, and there is a procedure. One is ideally supposed to take an open flame, but be careful, for open flames are not very compatible with modern furnishings. An electric torch. We have this image of switching the lights off, but Rabbi Moshe Feinstein recommends leaving the lights on because you see things better, and to make a bracha and to go around and search. And the custom has long been for someone else, or if you're alone, do it yourself notionally, to place some small pieces of bread so to ensure that the search is performed properly. It's not just a search for those bits, it's to search around the house, and the positioning of those pieces ensure that the search is done properly and the bracha is said appropriately. Those pieces of bread, food, and anything else that you're not planning to include in your sale should be set aside for Erev Pesach morning, and by the time that is printed, they'll be circulated, those products should be destroyed. It is normative to burn them, but I've already been asked by a number of people who are not familiar because of circumstance, but it's because of circumstance I hear not familiar with what to do. If you can burn it in a silver foil tin, that's fine, that is the ideal, but please be very careful. Only do this safely. If you don't have an outside area, do not attempt to do this and destroy your chametz by some other means, perhaps pouring bleach on them and putting it in the rubbish, or in small pieces, note only very small pieces to avoid a blockage, flush them down the toilet. The two times on Erev Pesach, the first is the last time for eating chametz, that's 2 variable hours before midday, and the other is the last time for owning chametz, by which time the sale will be made, that's 1 variable hour before halachic midday, which now that the clocks have changed, we're on BST, is at about 1 o'clock. Erev Pesach, it's not permitted to eat matzah. The rabbis are very keen that we should eat matzah with enthusiasm, with an appetite, and not, as it were, spoil the experience by eating it before. And that means it's not permitted on Erev Pesach to eat baked matzah goods. So two things to say about that. One is that many families, including ours, avoid matzah for longer than that. Some from the beginning of Nisan, some even from Purim. These practices are well known, and you should continue them if they're your family practice. But the halacha only requires one to abstain from matzah on Erev Pesach. And even then, only baked matzah goods which one could, or at least notionally, with which one could fulfill the mitzvah at the Seder. And that means coating fish in matzah meal and frying it, making something which is boiled or fried in some other way. These things are all permitted. These sorts of products, kanedlach for example, are all permitted on Erev Pesach because they're not the type of product with which one could fulfill the mitzvah. When it comes to Seder night, again, Seder night will be very different for many of us this year, and we know that many, unfortunately, will be isolated, and we hope to offer some kind of ongoing support. But nonetheless, the Seder is observed in the regular way to the extent that we are able. And here are some rules associated with the Seder. The first is that the Seder cannot begin before nightfall. That means since the clocks have changed, it's around 8:30, but do consult the times which are circulated as part of the Pesach programme. The reason for this is that the mitzvahs are all connected together. The mitzvah of eating matzah, the 4 cups of wine, telling the story are all associated with the night time, the moment of Exodus, and that doesn't begin until after nightfall. So unfortunately it's a little later than many of us would actually like to do this. Many of the mitzvahs are to be performed reclining, not leaning. Leaning is uncomfortable. Reclining is something more like this. One reclines clearly. This comes from Roman times where nobles would recline on couches. Most of us are not able to do that, but we honour this tradition nonetheless by reclining on the left side, and that's for the celebratory mitzvahs. That's for matzah, korech, and drinking the 4 cups. There are 4 specific mitzvahs of Seder night, 2 biblical and 2 rabbinic. The 2 biblical mitzvahs are eating matzah and telling the story. Eating matzah, ideally one should use shmura matzah. If one can get it, hand-baked matzah is good. It's more evocative, but machine-baked shmura matzah is also easily available, and that is absolutely fine as well. We eat matzah 3 times during the Seder, one for motzi matzah, which is at the end of the story, just after the 2nd cup. Then again, together with mora as korech, the sandwich, in which we recall the practice of Hillel, or as Hillel described it, and then again afikomen after the meal. For each of those occasions, one should eat a proper piece of matzah. It's not a nibble, it's an act of eating, and that would be defined as a piece of matzah, which is approximately the size of an adult's hand without the thumb, which means that you're eating approximately the size of 1 machine-baked matzah over the 3 consumptions, so not too much less than one would probably eat for breakfast. But nonetheless, one should try to eat it in a prompt time with the intention to fulfill the mitzvah. Telling the story is the other biblical mitzvah, and the story should be done in a way that's engaging, interesting. There are numerous translations, accompanying materials to make the story engaging and exciting and accessible to people of every level of knowledge, every level of interest, and of course every level of Hebrew skills. There are translations. There's no purpose in zipping through a text that the participants don't understand. So do read, explain it, expound it. Even if you do prefer to read it in Hebrew, unless your audience are all Hebrew speakers, you might like to translate it and explain as you go along, or apportion it to people around the table. The 2 rabbinic mitzvahs are eating moror and the 4 cups. The mitzvah of eating moror is mentioned in the Torah, but it's associated with the Pesach offering, and since we don't have that offering today, there's no biblical requirement to eat moror, but it is a rabbinic mitzvah nonetheless to recall the original practice. Many people use horseradish. You need to eat quite a bit of horseradish, probably a little less than an ounce each time. That's quite a lot. It does not need to be eaten in a lump, it can be grated. But actually the halacha prefers long-leaf lettuce, romaine lettuce as it's called. Ashkenaz intended not to use lettuce for moror because it wasn't available in the countries that many of us came from, but it's easily available now. If you use lettuce leaves, first of all make sure they're clean because sometimes they can be wormy, but assuming they're clean, you need to eat 2 reasonable sized leaves each time, which equate to a couple of big mouthfuls of squash lettuce. Much easier to eat than horseradish. If you're missing good old Ashkenazi horseradish, you can always put a little bit in with the lettuce to get the flavour. That's what I do at home. And finally, the 4 cups of wine. They are celebratory. There are 4 stages of the story of the Exodus, and we associate respectively Kadesh, that's the Kiddush, Magid telling the story, benching, and Hallel, the 4 steps of the Seder with one of each of these cups. These cups, again, are not a thimble, but they don't need to be huge. The minimum size is 86 millilitres, which is really the size of a quite small sherry glass, and one should ideally drink the whole cup, or if one can't manage that, the majority. In the event you can't stomach wine or it's too much, then dilute with grape juice, or just drink grape juice alone if you can't manage the alcohol at all. Pesach this year will be, as I said, quite different, really for everyone, but it's particularly tough on a certain segment of our community. I wish everyone blessing and success and happiness and an opportunity to find perhaps different meaning in the story of liberation this year. We will be thinking of every member of the community on Seder night and before and after, and there will still be a sermon for Pesach, which I'll cover some of these ideas again and offer some kind of word of thought. Thank you.